The first light of dawn always came quietly to Mara Ellison's homestead, slipping over the hills like a shy visitor afraid to disturb the fragile peace inside her small cabin. But for Mara, mornings had not felt peaceful for a long time, not since her husband, Daniel, died 2 winters ago in an accident that still replayed in her dreams. Now, each sunrise was simply the beginning of another long day of survival. At 32, Mara looked older than her years, not because of age, but because of exhaustion carved into her bones. Her hands, once soft from Daniel's insistence that she leave the heavy work to him, were now calloused and cracked from chopping wood, pulling stubborn weeds, milking the cow, and repairing anything that broke, which was often. Her back ached constantly, and her heart felt heavier with every passing month. The land that had once thrived under Daniel's care was now dry, stubborn, and unforgiving. The last rain had come weeks ago, and her crops drooped like dying soldiers. The well was lower than she'd ever seen it, and the animals were thinning from lack of grass. She had done her best, working from before sunrise until the moon climbed high, but nothing she did ever seemed enough. What kept her going were her children, 9-year-old Ella, gentle as a spring breeze, and 6-year-old Tommy, fierce and protective, much like his father had been. They were her strength and her weakness at the same time. She hid the truth of their situation as best she could, always smiling, always pretending they had enough, always tucking them into bed with stories instead of fear. But she couldn't hide reality from herself. The debt collectors were circling like wolves. The loan she and Daniel had taken to expand the barn years ago had ballooned after interest and penalties. She had paid what she could, but the last notice, folded tightly and hidden in her apron pocket, said she had only 2 weeks left before foreclosure. Sometimes late at night, when the children slept, Mara allowed herself to break. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flickering lamplight, fighting the urge to cry. The homestead was the last piece of Daniel she had left. Losing it would feel like losing him all over again, but every morning she forced herself up. She braided Ella's hair. She helped Tommy into his boots. She packed their small lunches for school. She fed the animals. She watered the crops with what little she could spare. She told them they were okay, because if she didn't believe it, how could they? Still, the pressure mounted daily. The chickens had stopped laying. The cow was producing less milk. The fences were falling apart, and the nights were growing colder, warning of an early winter that she wasn't prepared for. Mara began to wonder if she should send the children to her sister in town for a while, at least until she figured out how to save the homestead. But the thought of being separated from them made her sick. They were all she had. And she feared that once they left, she might never manage to bring them home again. In those moments of fear, she whispered a silent prayer, though she wasn't sure anymore if prayers were heard. She didn't ask for wealth or miracles, only a little help, a sign, something to show that she wasn't fighting alone. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't imagine, was that help was already on its way. And soon, fate would place a dying stranger on her doorstep who would change all of their lives forever. The afternoon heat rolled across the prairie like a living thing, shimmering against the dusty fields and turning the air thick enough to choke on. Mara had just finished patching the chicken, co-op roof, a job she never imagined doing alone, but necessity had made her learn skills she never wanted. Sweat dripped from her brow, and her hands shook with a kind of fatigue that wasn't just physical. She wiped her face with her sleeve and headed toward the house, hoping for a few minutes of rest before starting dinner. Ella and Tommy were playing by the fence line, their laughter thin but still the sweetest sound in Mara's life. She watched them for a moment, letting their innocence soften the weight pressing against her chest. But then she saw Ella stop suddenly, her small body going rigid. Tommy froze a split second later, mirroring her sister's tension. "Mama!" Tommy shouted, pointing toward the far end of the field. Mara's heart lurched. She dropped her tools and ran toward them, dust swirling around her boots. As she reached the fence, she saw what the children had seen. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, but swaying like a drunk, was staggering across their field. His clothes hung off him in torn, filthy pieces. His skin looked sunburned and cracked. And even from a distance, Mara could tell something was terribly wrong. He stumbled once, caught himself, then stumbled again. "Stay behind me," Mara said sharply, positioning herself between the children and the stranger. Her mind raced. Bandits sometimes roam these parts. Desperate drifters, too. She couldn't afford trouble, any kind of trouble. But something in the man's movements made her hesitate. He wasn't threatening anyone. He looked lost, hurt, fading. "Mama, he's gonna fall," Ella whispered. And he did. The man crumpled to the ground only a few dozen yards from the fence, collapsing face first into the dust. He didn't move, not even an arm to break the fall. For a moment, there was only silence, thick, heavy, and terrifying. Mara's instincts warred inside her, the fear of strangers versus the compassion that had once made her husband fall in love with her. But she couldn't stand by and watch a human being die in her field. "Stay here. Don't move," she told the children, her voice firm despite the pounding in her chest. She climbed the fence, the wood scraping her palms, and rushed toward the fallen man. Each step filled her with dread. What if he was dangerous? What if he was pretending? But when she knelt beside him, all her fears melted into shock. The man was burning with fever. His breathing was shallow, ragged. One side of his shirt was soaked with dried blood, the wound beneath it inflamed and untreated. His lips were cracked, his face gaunt, his hair matted against his forehead. "Sir," she whispered, leaning close, "can you hear me?" No response, only the faintest wheeze. He was on the edge of death. Mara's hands trembled. She had almost nothing to give, no extra food, no medicine, barely enough water for her children. But she could not, would not, leave him here to die alone. "Tommy," she called out, "bring my water jug and the old quilt. Hurry!" The children scrambled into action. As Mara turned the man onto his back, his eyes fluttered open for the briefest second blue. Stormy, filled with pain and something else she couldn't name. Then they closed again. "You're safe," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was true. "We'll take care of you." She didn't know where this stranger had come from or what danger he might bring. But one thing was certain. Their quiet, struggling life was about to change. Getting the unconscious stranger back to the cabin was far from easy. Mara had Tommy help her drag the old wagon from the barn, and together they managed barely to lift the man enough to roll him onto it. His body was frighteningly limp, like all the strength had been drained from him long ago. Every bump on the ground made him groan faintly, though his eyes never opened. Ella walked beside the wagon the whole way, biting her lip and clutching her ragged doll to her chest. She kept glancing at the stranger with a mixture of fear and compassion only a child could manage. Inside the cabin, Mara spread the old quilt on her own bed and eased the stranger onto it. Just that small act stole what remained of her strength. Sweat clung to her temples as she pushed damp hair from her face. "Mama? Is he gonna die?" Ella whispered. Mara paused, placing a hand on the stranger's forehead. It was scorching hot. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted softly. "But we're going to do everything we can." Her medical knowledge was limited, but survival had taught her enough. She fetched cool water, clean cloths, and the small jar of herbs Daniel had once used for fever. She ground them into a paste and mixed it with water, hoping it would help. Hours passed in slow, heavy minutes. Mara worked nonstop, cooling his skin, cleaning the wound hidden beneath his torn shirt, and whispering small reassurances even though she doubted he could hear. The wound along his ribs was ugly deep, infected, clearly untreated for days. It looked like it had been made by a blade, though she couldn't be sure. She cleaned it gently with warm water, then pack the herbs around it. The man gritted his teeth in unconscious pain, a low sound escaping him. "You're safe now," she murmured, though she felt anything but certain. Tommy hovered nearby with a bowl of water, refilling it each time she used up the cool cloth. He tried to look braver than he felt. Mara noticed his hands shaking and set a gentle hand on his head. "You're helping, sweetheart. I couldn't do this without you." His little chest puffed up with pride. Ella sat on a chair, singing softly an old tune Daniel used to hum on long evenings. Her tiny voice floated through the cabin like a fragile thread holding all of them together. Hours turned into the deep hush of night. The cabin grew dim except for the fading glow of the oil lamp. The children fell asleep at the foot of the bed, leaning against one another. Mara stayed awake, her eyes heavy but her resolve iron. Every so often, the stranger mumbled something indecipherable, names maybe, or fragments of memories. She leaned in, trying to catch anything that might reveal who he was, where he had come from, or what had happened to him. Nothing. Only pain and delirium. At one point, his hand twitched and brushed against hers. His fingers were calloused, rough hands that knew hard work, ranch work. Something about that small touch sent a strange ache through her chest. Loneliness, perhaps. Or something deeper, something she didn't dare explore. Near dawn, after endless hours, the stranger finally stirred more deliberately. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes as blue as a storm about to break. Confusion clouded them as he looked around the unfamiliar room. "You're safe," Mara said softly, leaning closer. "You're hurt. We found you in our field." His gaze lingered on her face a moment, searching, reading. Then he forced out a single hoarse word. "Why? Help me?" Mara swallowed, feeling a surprising tightness in her throat. "Because you needed someone," she answered. The slightest shadow of emotion flickered across his features before exhaustion pulled him back into sleep. Mara watched him for a long moment, unaware that this wounded stranger, this man she saved without knowing his name, was about to become the turning point of her entire life. The stranger slept in long, fever-heavy stretches over the next 2 days, waking only for moments at a time. Each time, he seemed confused, disoriented by the world around him, until Mara managed to calm him with a quiet word or the gentle touch of a cool cloth. But by the third morning, a change washed over him. His fever had broken during the night, leaving him pale, sweaty, and weak, but alive. When he opened his eyes and truly saw the little cabin for the first time, something in his face softened with an expression Mara couldn't quite name. Awe, maybe, relief, or something that looked painfully close to gratitude. She brought him a bowl of broth, the best she could make with what little she had. He tried to lift his hand to take it, but the effort made his arm tremble. Without hesitation, Mara pulled a chair closer and fed him spoon by spoon. He looked embarrassed at first, his jaw tightening. "I can manage," he murmured, though it was clear he couldn't. "You nearly died," Mara said, her tone more gentle than stern. "Let me help." He didn't fight her after that. The children came to peek from behind the doorframe, whispering to each other. The man's eyes flickered to them, and his expression changed again, softened, warmed as though he wasn't used to being looked at with innocent curiosity. Who are they?" he asked quietly. "My children," Mara answered. Ella and Tommy. The names seemed to linger in him as though he were storing them away. After a few sips of broth, color returned faintly to his cheeks. He exhaled slowly, then looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart beat a little faster. "I reckon I owe you my life," he said. His voice was low, rough from thirst and injury. "You don't owe me anything," Mara replied. Anyone would have done the same. He gave a faint, sardonic smile. Not anyone. There was a story behind those words. Mara could feel it. So, she asked cautiously, "Do you have a name?" For a moment, He hesitated as if a name was a heavy thing to hand over. "Luke," he finally said. Luke Calder. The name fit him somehow, strong, steady, wounded. Mara nodded slowly. "I'm Mara Ellison." Something flickered in his eyes, a flash of recognition, not of her, but of her situation. He glanced around the cabin, at the patched walls, the worn furniture, the quiet signs of a woman trying to hold everything together alone. "You're widowed," he said gently, not a question, but an observation. Mara stiffened. "How did you?" "The look in your eyes," he answered softly. "It's the same as mine." The vulnerability in his voice startled her. She sat back a little, studying him. There were shadows behind his eyes, deep, hollow shadows carved by loss, pain, and abandonment. "What happened to you?" she asked. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, as though searching for the right words. "Lost the ranch," he murmured. "Lost everything, a bad streak, bad luck. And a man I trusted sticking a knife in my back." Not the literal one. A grim chuckle escaped him. Then his gaze turned distant. Fire took what was left. "I've been drifting for months, trying to find work. Trying to stay alive." Mara felt the weight of his words like a stone sinking into her chest. He wasn't just hurt, he had nothing. No home, no family, no place to return to. Just like her, he had been surviving out of sheer will. She suddenly saw the truth. This was a man who had been beaten down by life, yet somehow hadn't given up. "Luke," she whispered. "I'm sorry." He turned his head toward her, meeting her eyes with a look so raw it made her breath hitch. "Don't be," he said. "I'm alive because you stopped to care. That's more than anyone's done for me in a long time." A quiet moment stretched between them, fragile, unexpected. Neither of them knew then that this bond, born from pain and kindness, would grow into something powerful enough to change all their lives forever. Luke grew stronger with each passing day, though the healing came in slow, careful steps. Mara tried not to watch him too closely, tried not to let curiosity or gratitude turn into something else, but it was hard not to notice the quiet determination in the man resting in the bed she had once shared with her late husband. He didn't complain, didn't ask for anything more than water or a little broth, and always apologized when he felt he was being a burden. Mara assured him he wasn't, even though she sometimes felt the weight of her own conscience, knowing she barely had enough resources for her family, and yet she had taken in a wounded stranger. But something unexpected happened. Luke began helping long before he was strong enough to. On the 5th morning after his fever broke, Mara found him sitting up on the edge of the bed, grimacing in pain but fighting through it as he tried to pull on his boots. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. He paused, panting lightly. "Easing your workload. You can barely stand." Luke attempted to push himself upright. His legs trembled immediately, and he sank back down with a frustrated exhale. Mara crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "See?" He managed a wry smile. Thought it was worth a try. Despite the seriousness of the situation, she felt a small laugh bubbling up. She caught it before it escaped, but Luke saw the glimmer in her eyes and grinned. "Let me help when I can," he added more gently. "I owe you that much." "You owe me nothing," Mara said for the 100th time. But this time, Luke held her gaze steadily. "Maybe not, but I'd still like to give something back." And slowly, day by day, he did. The moment he was strong enough to walk without collapsing, he went outside and began fixing things she'd long given up on. The fence by the west field, half broken from storms, was reinforced by afternoon. The warped barn doors suddenly swung straight again. The chicken coop got a new hinge. Even the squeaky backstep got repaired, which made Tommy cheer like it was the greatest miracle on earth. "You fixed it." The boy beamed, hopping on the step over and over. Luke chuckled. "Good as new. You're like a cowboy doctor for broken wood." Tommy announced proudly. "Not quite," Luke said with amusement. "But I know my way around a ranch. Ella warmed to him the fastest. She followed him around quietly like a little shadow, asking shy questions. Luke always answered as though her words were the most important thing he'd heard all day. "What's your favorite animal?" she asked once, sitting on a hay bale beside him. "Horses," he said, "but only the kind that don't bite." Ella giggled. "Mama says Tommy bites sometimes. Hey!" Tommy shouted from across the yard. Luke laughed a deep, warm sound that made something flutter inside Mara's chest when she heard it through the open window. She told herself it was only gratitude. Nothing more. Nothing that complicated her already difficult life. But she couldn't deny the truth. Their home felt different with Luke around. Safer, livelier, almost full again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the fields, Mara stepped outside and saw Luke sitting with the children beneath a lone oak tree. He was telling them a story from his childhood, one involving a stubborn bull and a runaway rooster, and the children were leaning against him, laughing with open, joyful hearts. The sight made Mara's breath catch. Her children hadn't laughed like that in months. And for the first time, she wondered if Luke's arrival was more than coincidence, if fate itself had woven his broken path into theirs. But she brushed the thought away. Her life was too tangled, too uncertain, too fragile to let hope take root. Still, when Luke glanced up and their eyes met across the yard, warm, steady, quietly grateful, something inside her whispered, "This man is changing everything." The first sign something was wrong came in the form of dust and angry cloud rising on the horizon, moving fast, too straight, too purposeful to be the wind. Mara noticed it while hanging wet laundry on the line. The moment her eyes caught the glint of metal beneath the dust, her stomach dropped. A rider dressed in dark clothing, and she already knew who it was. She stood frozen for a moment, clothespin clenched tight in her fingers. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a desperate fist trying to escape. Not now. Not when she'd finally begun to breathe again. Not when the children were smiling again. Not when Luke was healing. But trouble never cared about timing. The rider slowed as he reached the yard, dust swirling around his boots as he dismounted. He didn't bother tying up his horse. He simply walked toward her with the confidence of a man who believed every place he stepped already belonged to him. "Morning, Mrs. Ellison," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. Mara forced her voice steady. "Mr. Carver. Silas Carver. The land agent. The collector." The Wolf in a jacket stitched with lies. He was the man who had been tightening a noose around her homestead for months and enjoying every second of it. "I assume you know why I'm here," he drawled. Mara swallowed. "I paid what I could last month." Not enough," Carver cut in smoothly. "Not even close." His eyes swept over the yard, over the patched fence, the drying laundry, the old tools. And then dangerously they drifted toward the barn. "Seems someone's been doing repairs," he murmured. Mara stiffened. Luke. She had to protect him, especially from Carver. Something about the man's presence was a poison that could slip into any crack it found. "I've been fixing things myself," she said quickly. Carver raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Just then, the children burst out of the house, chasing each other. Laughter filled the air. But the moment they saw Carver, they stopped. The joy on their faces faded into nervous silence. Ella stepped behind Mara. Tommy glared openly, fists clenched at his sides. "Well now," Carver said slowly, "don't they look just like their dear old daddy?" Mara felt cold. "Don't talk about him," Carver smirked. "Why not?" "His poor decisions put you in this situation." Shame he couldn't finish what he started. Mara's breath shook with anger. "Get to the point." "The point," Carver said, pulling a folded document from his pocket, "is that you're out of time. You have 1 week left. Pay the full amount, or the land becomes property of the Dawson Company." She felt faint. "A week? That's not what the notice said." He smiled thinly. New calculations. Those calculations are wrong. Not according to the books. Mara clenched her jaw. I won't let you take my home. Oh, I think you will, he said, stepping closer. Unless you've got a miracle hidden around here. Money. A new husband with coin. A miracle rancher tucked under your bed. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across the doorway. Luke. He stood beside the cabin door, bracing himself with one hand against the frame. His eyes were icy, sharp, nothing like the gentleman the children had grown attached to. Carver turned, eyes widening for a fraction of a second, recognition flashing bright and fierce. Well, Carver drawled, this is unexpected. Luke didn't speak. He simply stared at Carver, every muscle tense. That man shouldn't be here, Luke said to Mara, though his gaze never left Carver. Carver chuckled softly. And here I thought you were dead. Mara's breath froze. Luke's jaw tightened. Wishful thinking on your part. Carver tucked the paper back into his pocket and swung into his saddle. You've got 1 week, Mrs. Ellison, and I'll be back. He tipped his hat toward Luke mockingly. And you? We'll pick up where we left off soon. Then he rode away, dust swallowing his figure. Mara turned to Luke, her voice trembling. Luke? What does he mean? How do you know Carver? Luke's expression hardened into something she'd never seen before. Because he's part of the reason I lost everything, he said quietly. And he's more dangerous than you realize. For several moments after Carver disappeared into the distance, neither Mara nor Luke spoke. The only sound was the fluttering laundry on the line and the uneven breathing of the children, who clung close to Mara, eyes darting between her and Luke. Finally, Mara found her voice. Luke, what does he mean you're supposed to be dead? Luke gripped the doorframe a little tighter, steadying himself. His ribs still hurt, but the pain didn't seem to matter now. His eyes were locked on the horizon where Carver had vanished, filled with a cold fire Mara hadn't seen before. It's a long story, he said quietly. We have time, Mara replied. But her voice wasn't sharp. It was steady, grounded in the same strength that had saved his life. Luke drew in a deep breath, then nodded toward the children. Maybe they shouldn't hear all of it. Tommy stepped forward, chin raised stubbornly. We can handle it. Luke's expression softened. I'm sure you can, kid. But let me talk to your mama alone for a minute. Reluctantly, Tommy led Ella inside. The moment the door closed, Luke exhaled shakily. Mara, I didn't just lose a ranch, he began. It was stolen. Taken right out from under me, she frowned. I don't understand. You said you had bad luck. That things went wrong. They did, but not naturally. He paused. Carver worked for me once. Mara's breath caught. You owned a ranch big enough to need agents? Luke nodded slowly, guilt shadowing his features. The Calder Ranch, nearly 2,000 acres. My father left it to me when he passed. Mara stared, stunned. She had imagined Luke as a wanderer, a drifter, someone with nothing, but a ranch of that size. That meant wealth, inheritance, legacy. What happened? She asked softly. Carver, Luke said bitterly. And the Dawson Company he works for. He began to pace slowly, every step deliberate. I was young, too trusting. I hired Carver to help manage the land records, the cattle contracts, the finances. He was smart, charming. Everyone said he was loyal. Mara's heart sank. But he wasn't. No, Luke murmured. He forged signatures, altered contracts, shifted land boundaries. I didn't notice at first, not until the company filed a claim saying half the ranch belonged to them. Half? Mara whispered. Luke nodded. They pressured me, blocked my water rights, cut off supply lines. Then the fire happened. Mara's blood chilled. Your house? Burned to the ground, Luke said, voice quiet but trembling with restrained emotion. I'd barely made it out. Everyone assumed I died in the flames. Carver didn't bother correcting the rumor. Her hand flew to her mouth. "So that's why he said he thought you were dead?" "Yes," Luke answered. "And if I had stayed, I would be. They wanted me gone, Mara. They still do." The weight of his words settled over her like a storm cloud. "So when you left that ranch," Mara whispered, "you didn't just lose it." "You were forced out," Luke nodded. "I wandered for months trying to gather proof, trying to survive long enough to expose them. But I got ambushed outside town, robbed, beaten, stabbed. Whoever attacked me wanted to finish what the fire didn't." Mara felt her knees weaken. "And then—" "You collapsed on my land," she breathed. Luke looked up, meeting her gaze with a mixture of vulnerability and conviction. "You saving me wasn't chance," he said. "Carver is tied to your debts, too. The same company trying to destroy me is trying to take your home." Mara felt tears burn her eyes, not of fear, but of dawning clarity. "So what are you going to do now?" she whispered. Luke took a step closer, eyes steady and fierce. "I'm going to get my ranch back," he said, "and when I do, I'll make sure you never lose yours." His vow hung in the air between them, powerful, impossible, yet somehow believable. Mara's heart raced in her chest. Luke Calder wasn't just a wounded stranger anymore. He was a man ready to fight, and she had just become part of that fight. The air in Mara's cabin was thick with tension as Luke spread out old letters, worn deeds, and faded contracts across the kitchen table. The children sat quietly on the floor, legs crossed, their small hands folded in their laps. Mara leaned against the counter, her eyes scanning every word Luke pulled from his worn leather satchel. What had started as a chance act of kindness had become a lifeline, not just for her family, but for the man who had collapsed on their property weeks ago. "We can prove it," Luke said, tracing a finger along the edge of a document. His blue eyes, once haunted and unsure, now gleamed with determination. "All of this letters from my father, witness statements from old ranch hands. Notarized receipts shows that Carver and the Dawson Company forged claims against my property." Mara's mind raced. "And how does that help us?" "The notice said we only have a week before foreclosure." Luke exhaled, leaning back in the chair. "It helps because the same crooked papers Carver used to steal my ranch were manipulated to pressure you as well. They're connected." His voice was calm, almost clinical, but the fire behind it was unmistakable. "If we expose their schemes, we can not only reclaim what is mine but protect your home from their grasp." Mara felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. She had spent sleepless nights worrying about foreclosure, about losing the last piece of her late husband's legacy. Now it seemed fate had intervened not with luck, but with Luke, a man whose life had been ruined by the same people threatening hers. "What do we do first?" she asked, swallowing the lump in her throat. She wasn't naive. She knew taking on Carver and his powerful backers would be dangerous. But for the first time in months, she felt capable. Luke's calm confidence was contagious. "We gather witnesses," Luke said, standing and pacing slowly. "Old ranch hands who saw the transfers, local merchants who recorded payments, anyone who can testify against Carver's lies. Every bit counts. The law may not care about a widow or a wandering rancher, but it does care about paper and truth." The children exchanged glances, understanding more than their age should allow. Ella whispered, "We can help too, Mama." Mara smiled, kneeling to pull her daughter close. "We'll all help, but we must be careful." Over the next days, Luke and Mara formed a quiet alliance with the local community. Luke's former ranch hands, still loyal to his family's name, came forward with statements. Merchants vouched for payments Carver had attempted to cover up. Even a neighboring rancher, once skeptical of Mara's struggles, offered to testify about seeing Carver's men lurking around her property, a silent intimidation that had gone unrecorded until now. As evidence mounted, Mara realized how much Luke had grown into the role of protector, not just for himself, but for her and the children. His presence wasn't just physical. It radiated a kind of security she hadn't known she could feel again. The cabin, once a place of struggle and fatigue, now buzzed with purpose, the quiet determination of a family ready to fight injustice. At night, after the children had gone to bed, Luke and Mara would sit on the porch, discussing strategies, reviewing documents, and sometimes just talking. Their bond deepened not with the immediacy of romance, but with trust and shared commitment. She found herself laughing at his dry humor and admiring the quiet wisdom behind his careful planning. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in amber, Mara realized something startling. She no longer felt helpless. They were no longer victims waiting for salvation. They were active participants in reclaiming their lives, armed with evidence, allies, and an unspoken courage that came from protecting what truly mattered. Luke's gaze met hers, calm but intense. "We'll make them pay for everything they've done," he said softly. Mara nodded, feeling her own resolve harden. "And we'll win together." The wind whispered through the tall grass beyond the cabin, carrying with it the promise of change. For the first time in a long while, Mara allowed herself to imagine a future free from fear, a future built on justice, courage, and a bond that had begun in the unlikeliest of ways. The morning of the court hearing arrived crisp and clear, the kind of day that seemed to carry its own sense of justice. Mara stood outside the courthouse, clutching Ella's hand in one and Tommy's in the other. Luke walked beside her, steady and calm, the weight of the past weeks evident in his posture, but softened by a quiet confidence that radiated reassurance. The children's eyes were wide with both fear and hope. They had come to trust that this man, once a stranger, now fought for them as fiercely as they would for themselves. Inside the courtroom, Carver and his attorneys were already seated, their smug expressions barely hiding the irritation of seeing Luke appear alive, well and fully prepared. The Dawson Company lawyers glanced nervously at the pile of documents Luke laid out on the table. Notarized receipts, letters from long-lost ranch hands, land surveys, and eyewitness statements. Each piece of evidence meticulously demonstrated the fraud and manipulation that had ruined Luke's ranch and threatened Mara's homestead. The judge, a stern woman with a sharp gaze, surveyed the room, then leaned forward. "Mr. Calder, you may present your case." Luke stood tall, a little paler than usual but unwavering. He spoke clearly and deliberately, recounting the series of betrayals, the forged papers, and Carver's direct role in both his and Mara's misfortunes. Mara felt a surge of pride and relief as witnesses, people she had met only briefly but who had come forward out of loyalty and honesty, spoke one by one, corroborating Luke's account. Their voices rang in the wooden room like chimes of truth cutting through years of deception. Carver sneered, attempting to undermine their credibility, but it was clear the tide had shifted. The combination of Luke's first-hand testimony and the mountain of evidence left the opposing side scrambling for counterpoints that simply did not exist. Mara held her breath with every word, sensing the invisible scales of justice tipping in their favor. Finally, after hours of careful examination, the judge leaned back and spoke. "The court finds in favor of Mr. Calder. The claims filed by the Dawson Company are invalid. All rights to the Calder Ranch are hereby restored to him. Furthermore, Mrs. Mara Ellison's homestead shall remain intact, with no outstanding debts held against her by the company." Mara's knees nearly gave way. Relief, joy, and disbelief collided in her chest. Ella clung to her, giggling in pure delight, while Tommy punched the air in triumph. Luke exhaled deeply, a rare smile breaking across his face, the first Mara had seen that seemed entirely free of worry. Outside, the sunlight felt warmer, as if even the earth celebrated the victory. Luke turned to Mara, eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. "We did it," he said softly. Mara shook her head, a laugh slipping through her tears. "No, you did it. You didn't just save yourself, you saved us too." Luke's gaze softened. We saved each other. In the weeks that followed, life on Mara's homestead began to blossom. Luke returned to the Calder Ranch, reclaiming the land that had been stolen from him for so long, but he did not leave Mara behind. He ensured that her property thrived, improving the soil, bringing in extra supplies, and repairing the old fences. The children's laughter echoed across the fields once again, stronger and freer than it had been in years. Mara realized something profound. The man they had saved, the stranger who had stumbled into their lives in desperation, had become the cornerstone of their future. Together they had faced greed, corruption, and uncertainty, and emerged not only victorious but transformed. The homestead was no longer a place of fear and survival. It was a home filled with love, trust, and the promise of tomorrow. Mara felt a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as a family. The widow who had feared losing everything had gained something far greater: security, hope, and a man who had proven that even the most broken paths could lead to redemption. The golden light of late afternoon spilled over the Calder Ranch, stretching shadows long across the fields and painting the hills with warmth. Mara stood at the edge of the garden, her hands resting on Tommy's small shoulder, Ella's hand in hers, watching Luke walk toward them across the freshly mended fence line. For months, this scene would have been unimaginable. A man who had been a stranger, who had collapsed into their lives in desperation, now returning as a protector, a partner, and a friend. The children ran toward Luke before Mara could speak. Ella's laughter rang through the air as she threw her arms around his waist. Tommy tackled him, nearly knocking him over. Luke's deep laughter joined theirs, echoing across the ranch in a way that made Mara's heart ache with relief and joy. He bent down, lifting Tommy into his arms, spinning him once before setting him gently back on the ground. He ruffled Ella's hair with a smile, and she giggled uncontrollably. Mara's breath caught as she watched them. This man, who had been near death just weeks ago, had become an inseparable part of their lives. Every scar he carried, every hardship he had endured, had led him here, into her family, into their home. She realized then that fate had a strange, merciless way of working. Sometimes it broke you, only to put the pieces back together in ways far better than you could have imagined. Luke turned his gaze toward her. His eyes, clear and steady, held a depth she had never seen before. "Mara," he said softly, "you saved me, and now I can't imagine leaving you or the children behind. Not ever." Her lips trembled as she stepped closer. "Luke, I never expected anyone like you. Not after everything we've been through, but She paused, searching for the words. "We belong together now. I can see it. I can feel it." Luke reached out, taking both her hands in his. "Then let's make it real," he whispered. "If you're willing, I want us to be a family. Not just by circumstance, but by choice." Mara's heart swelled. She had spent years protecting her children, shielding them from loss, from pain, from disappointment. And now, here was a man willing to protect them too, to love them without hesitation, without condition. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice firm but soft. "We'll be a family. All of us." The children cheered, as though understanding that this moment marked the beginning of something permanent. Luke crouched to their level, smiling widely. "So, does that make me your new daddy?" He teased gently. Ella's eyes sparkled as she nodded. "Yes, you're our daddy now." Tommy crossed his arms, pretending to look stern, but the grin on his face betrayed him. "You better take care of us, Daddy Calder." Luke chuckled and scooped them both into his arms. "I plan to, forever." Mara felt the sun's warmth on her face and looked out over the fields that had once been a symbol of struggle and hardship. Now, with Luke at her side and her children laughing freely, the land no longer felt like a burden. It felt like home. It felt alive. And it felt like a promise that the darkness they had endured could never erase the light they had fought so hard to find. She glanced at Luke, seeing the man he had become, strong, steadfast, and wholly devoted to them. And in that glance, she saw a reflection of her own courage, resilience, and willingness to believe in hope again. In the distance, the ranch stretched under the endless sky, a testament to second chances, new beginnings, and the power of kindness. Mara took a deep breath, letting the moment sink into her bones. She had saved a dying stranger once, and in return, he had given them a future they could never have imagined. Hand in hand, the new family, widow children, and the man who had changed their lives forever walked toward the ranch house, ready to face whatever the world might bring, together. The past was behind them. The future was theirs. And for the first time in a long while, Mara felt truly, deeply, unshakably happy.